lemon pies and a rusty garage. The gavel's report, a dull knock mirroring the hollowness inside her, punctuated Judge Thompson's monotone. The woman's face, a roadmap of disappointed expectations, listed the terms. Shared custody of Bartholomew Grimsby Accounting, the marital residence, and the beachfront property remain with Mr. Grimsby. Flora clutched her purse, the leather worn smooth with worry, knuckles bleached white. Each clause felt like a debit on a soul-crushing ledger. Their house, echoing with faded laughter and supper-time stories, was now solely his domain. The condo, scene of strained anniversaries and false smiles, forever tainted by his betrayal. Ms. Lemon is awarded $50,000, spousal support for 2 years, and sole proprietorship of the premises at 312 Banyan Street, also known as Grease Monkey's Garage. Almost missed it. Grease Monkey's Garage. She shot a glance at Hank. His usual veneer of smug assurance crumbled into a gloating smirk. A whispered aside to his lawyer elicited a chuckle. Had she misheard? That ramshackle blight on the town's edge. Worthless. A final, cutting jest he'd slip through. The judge's pronouncement, court adjourned, released a flurry of activity. Lawyers snapped briefcases shut, embittered couples shuffled out. Flora remained, paralyzed, the words ricocheting in her skull. Grease Monkey's Garage. He sauntered over, his smirk now a full-blown leer. Feeling fortunate, Flora. Always knew you harbored a secret longing for grime and gears. Perhaps you'll bake for the mechanics. Oh, wait. He paused, a pantomime of reflection. There aren't any mechanics. Unless you're counting pigeons. Flora refused to break. She'd rehearsed this confrontation, armor-plating herself against his venom. Enjoy the condo, Hank, she stated, her voice remarkably even. I hear the termites are hosting rave reviews. Head high, she turned, ignoring the sting of his guffaws. Outside, the fierce Florida sun mocked the splintered remnants of her sun-drenched dreams. A thick envelope was thrust into her hand by her lawyer. Ms. Lemon, all documentation and keys. Congratulations. I suppose. A fleetingly sympathetic smile, and he vanished into the lawyer swarm. She slumped onto a nearby bench, the hefty package a dead weight. Ripping it open, her hands trembled, blurring the legalese. But the keys were undeniable. Solid, cold steel. She stared, a tempest of fury and confusion swirling within. He genuinely believed he'd triumphed. Thought her incapable of more than sugared crusts and floral arrangements. She'd prove him wrong. The drive to 312 Banyan felt interminable. The neighborhoods progressively lost their luster, homes becoming smaller, shabbier. Finally, it loomed. Grease Monkey's Garage. Worse than imagined. The structure was a faded, peeling cerulean, the shade of a rain-beaten robin's egg. Rust infested every surface, a corrosive disease. Grimy, cracked windows obscured the interior. The sign, clinging by a single corroded bolt, proclaimed, Grease Monkeys, in phantom letters. Weeds strangled the fractured asphalt. A lone, deflated tire lay abandoned. Flora parked a safe distance away, the Florida heat bearing down. Approaching cautiously, as if the building were feral, she inhaled the heavy miasma of oil, gasoline, and decay. Fumbling, she found the key for the padlock. It took persistence to wrestle the rusted mechanism open. With an anguished screech, she heaved the door upward, unveiling darkness. And amplified odors. Musty fabric, stale coffee, and another, indefinable scent, old secrets. Flora hesitated. She wasn't sure what she expected, but this wasn't it. Cobwebs hung like ghastly tapestries. Tools were scattered across the floor, coated in filth. An abandoned mechanic's creeper rested beneath a vintage automobile, its chrome bumper catching a glint of the feeble light. The car. A marvel, even under the dust. A classic roadster, long and graceful, promising velocity and liberation. Car knowledge was limited, but she recognized excellence. Tentatively, she stepped inside, shards of glass and brittle leaves crunching underfoot. The air hung thick and motionless, as if time itself had seized up. She ran a hand along the fender, cold metal under her palm, and felt an odd connection. A sudden scuttle startled her. From the garage's depths. Heart hammering, she recoiled. A rat. A raccoon. Perhaps Hank, ready with another dose of condescension. Snatching a rusty wrench from a workbench, her hand shook. Hello, barely audible. Silence. She inhaled deeply and ventured further in, brandishing the wrench. The rear was darker, more cluttered. Shelves groaned under spare parts, oil drums, dusty containers. A workbench, covered in tools and blueprints, stood beneath a solitary, flickering bulb. Then she spotted it, a framed photograph, leaning against a stack of tires. Wiping away the grime, she saw a woman standing proudly before the garage. Young, with a resolute glint in her eye and a wrench in her grip, she wore overalls and a bandana, hair pulled back. A small sign beneath read, "Rosie, Grease Monkey Extraordinaire." Recognition flared, a curious sense of kinship. Who was Rosie? What was her link to this forgotten place? The ensuing hour vanished in exploration. Apprehension yielded to burgeoning curiosity. She found aged ledgers detailing repairs and sales. She unearthed vintage tools, each a relic of a bygone era. She discovered a stack of letters, bound with faded ribbon, their yellowed pages filled with heartfelt script. This wasn't just a derelict structure. It was a capsule of time, filled with the echoes of a life lived, a story awaiting its telling. And Flora, lemon pie artisan, the woman who believed she'd lost everything, suddenly became the steward of a legacy. Outside, the sun began its descent, painting long shadows. Flora stood before the garage, keys clutched tightly. Grease Monkey's garage. A mess, a disaster, a burden. But it was hers. She gazed at the peeling paint, the corroded metal, the rampant weeds. And for the first time since the divorce, felt something other than bleakness. A flicker of possibility. A surge of resolve. She had no idea what she'd do with the place. Knew nothing of vehicles, mechanics, or commerce. But she knew one thing. She would not allow Hank to prevail. Would not allow this place to crumble. She would discover Rosie's story, and resurrect Grease Monkey's garage. The next morning, purpose propelled Flora from bed. She brewed stout coffee and assembled a batch of her signature lemon pies, the sweet tart scent permeating her small apartment. She needed to strategize. While glazing the last pie, the phone rang. Hank. So, he drawled, dripping with faux concern. How's the garage coming? Uncovered any pirate's gold yet? Flora inhaled deeply, refusing to be baited. It's intriguing, she replied, measuring her words. It has character. Hank chuckled. Character? It's got rot and asbestos. Lucky if you can sell the land for anything. Perhaps, Flora said. But I'm not selling. Silence. What are you talking about? I'm renovating, Flora announced, her voice gaining strength. I'm reopening Grease Monkey's garage. Hank erupted in laughter. You. A wrench monkey. That's the funniest thing I've heard. You can barely fill the tires with air. I'll learn, Flora declared. And I'll find someone who knows what they're doing. You're wasting your time, Flora, Hank's tone turned sharp. You're way out of your depth. Just sell it and move on. Take the cash and run. No, Flora said, firmly. I'm not running. I'm staying and fighting. And I'm turning Grease Monkey's garage into a success. She disconnected, her hand trembling faintly. She knew Hank didn't believe in her. Never had. But that ceased to matter. She believed. And she had a feeling that Rosie, wherever she was, did, too. Flora regarded the lemon pies, their golden crusts gleaming in the morning light. Symbols of her past, a reminder of the life she was leaving behind. But also emblems of her future, testaments to her resilience, her ingenuity, her talent for turning sourness into sweetness, or, in this instance, lemon pies into a flourishing auto shop. She grabbed her purse, packed a lemon pie in a box, and grabbed the keys to Grease Monkey's garage. Time to begin. Grease monkeys and cobwebs. The address, scrawled onto the divorce papers with such smugness, led Flora down an increasingly narrow lane, the asphalt disintegrating beneath her sedan's tires. Each bone-jarring jolt felt like another barb from Hank, a constant reminder of his patronizing attitude. Finally, she saw it, Grease Monkey's garage. Not the quaintly nostalgic establishment she'd envisioned, but a hovel. The structure, a low rectangle, was nearly consumed by rampant vegetation. Flaking paint peeled from the clapboard like shedding skin, exposing bare, time-beaten wood. The solitary garage door, a corrugated iron beast, hung askew, rusted a bilious orange, its gaping maw a silent threat. A faded sign, clinging precariously to the eaves, proclaimed "Grease Monkeys" in a typeface antedating modern memory. One E was conspicuously absent, leaving only a lonely, ironic apostrophe to mark its passing. Flora parked on the unkempt verge, silencing the engine. The ensuing quiet was dense, broken only by the thrum of distant traffic and the drone of insects gorging on the overgrowth. She gripped the wheel, a wave of despair cresting over her. This was Hank's gleeful inheritance. With a determined swallow, she emerged. The air was thick with the aroma of damp earth, decaying foliage, and a sharp tang reminiscent of old oil and faded aspirations. Gravel crunched under her practical shoes as she approached the shadowed recess of the garage. Cobwebs draped everything like morbid decorations, connecting forgotten tools, descending from rafters, and shrouding the skeletal remains of a former workbench. Airborne dust motes pirouetted in faint sunlight, illuminating a scene of utter abandonment. The interior presented a chaotic tableau. Discarded tires lay in tangled piles, their rubber scored with age. Rusted implements were strewn across the floor, half submerged in grime. A stripped engine block, coated in a film of oil, sat wretchedly on a makeshift stand, its purpose long since obscured. The stale air carried a musty odor that tightened around Flora's throat. Venturing further, glass shards crunched beneath her sensible flats. On the wall hung a sun-bleached calendar, its pages fixed on July 1978. A pin-up girl, her smile jarringly bright against the backdrop of decay, stared from the brittle paper. She reached out, sweeping a cobweb from her face. It felt like touching a memory. In a corner, overshadowed by a listing shelf, she found a workbench. Or what remained. The aged timbers were warped and splintered, the surface marred by years of accumulated filth. A vise, seized solid, clamped stubbornly to one edge, its jaws locked in a perpetual, silent grip. Yet, despite the ruin, something caught Flora's eye. On the far wall, behind the defunct workbench, a mural had been attempted. The colors, faded and masked by grime, barely revealed the outline of an airplane, a streamlined, silver bird with wings that appeared to span the entire wall. Below it, in time-worn letters, read the inscription, "Fly high, Rosie's angels." Rosie. That name again. Flora trailed a finger across the dusty paint, a spark of curiosity igniting within her. Who was Rosie? And who were Rosie's angels? She stepped back, absorbing the scene. The crumbling walls, the corroded tools, the all-encompassing scent of decay. It was too much. This wasn't a business, it was a catastrophe. The initial despair surged back, fiercer than before. What was she supposed to do with this albatross? She knew nothing about automotive repair, nothing about mechanics, nothing about managing a garage. Hank was probably snickering, imagining her floundering in this ramshackle mess. Her immediate inclination was to liquidate. To divest herself of it. To staunch the bleeding and move forward. She could channel the money into a fresh apartment, a new chapter. A life free from greasy tools and the specter of Rosie. The thought was alluring. It felt, in fact, like the only logical recourse. She retreated outside, squinting in the sudden glare. The sunlight seemed to mock her fragility. She glanced back at the garage, its dilapidated facade a monument to years of abandonment. As she reached for the car door, something arrested her. It wasn't a deliberate choice, more like a visceral resistance to surrender. Hank anticipated her failure. He expected her capitulation. He expected her to buckle beneath the burden of his malice. And something within her, a resilience she hadn't realized she possessed, refused to grant him that satisfaction. She slammed the car door, the sound reverberating in the stillness. No. She wouldn't sell. Not yet. She owed it to herself, and perhaps to this Rosie, whoever she was, to at least try. To discern if anything could be salvaged from this wreckage. But as she gazed upon the decrepit garage, a wave of uncertainty crashed over her. Where would she even commence? The task loomed insurmountable, the challenge daunting. Grease Monkey's garage wasn't just a business in need of restoration, it was a testament to neglect. A chronicle of decline. And Flora, standing there in her sensible flats and her newly single life, felt a prickle of trepidation. Perhaps Hank was right. Perhaps she was out of her depth. She retrieved her phone, scrolling through her contacts. Her fingers lingered over her friend Carol's number. Carol, the ever-practical one who could always conjure a solution. Carol, who would advise her to sell, to cut her losses, to proceed. But then, she paused. Instead, she switched off her phone and returned it to her purse. She would speak to Carol later. Now, she needed clarity. She needed a strategy. She turned back toward the garage, her eyes sweeping over the rampant weeds, the flaking paint, the rusting metal. She needed to find a way to resuscitate this place. To revive the memory of Rosie and her angels. But first, she needed a sturdy pair of gloves. And perhaps a tetanus booster. Worth less than scrap metal. Dust motes pirouetted in the feeble sunbeams that pierced the grime-coated window of the office. Flora perched precariously on a chair's edge, attempting to project a confidence she was far from feeling. Across from her, Brenda Stern, the real estate agent, rhythmically tapped a lacquered nail against a manila folder. Not a hair was astray in Brenda's impeccably styled blonde coif, a sharp contrast to the disarray of Flora's own hastily assembled ponytail. "So, Flora," Brenda began, her voice a practiced melody. "As we discussed, an appraisal's been completed. And, well, let's just say the market isn't exactly clamoring for dilapidated garages in Harmony Creek's forgotten reaches." Flora's stomach lurched. She'd anticipated this outcome, yet hearing it articulated in Brenda's clinical tone felt like a punch. Against her better judgment, she'd entertained a spark of optimism, envisioning the garage transformed, a lively hub resonating with the clatter of tools and infused with the tang of oil and future possibilities. Brenda withdrew a document, her face carefully unreadable. "The location presents challenges. It's beyond the primary commercial area, and pedestrian traffic is virtually non-existent. Then, naturally, there's the building's condition." She paused, her expertly sculpted brows lifting ever so slightly. "Profound disrepair. Asbestos issues. Obsolete wiring. Frankly, it's astonishing it's still standing." Flora swallowed hard, her throat suddenly parched. "The appraisal, then," she managed. Brenda exhaled, a refined, almost dramatic sound. "It reflects the difficulties. The land possesses intrinsic worth, but factoring in demolition expenses, which are considerable, and the necessary environmental remediation, the resulting value is negligible." She averted her eyes, her focus glued to the paper. "Essentially, it's worth less than its weight in iron." The air in the cramped office seemed to congeal, pressing down on Flora. A wave of queasiness washed over her, a nauseating blend of despair and fury. Hank. This was his intention, wasn't it? To burden her with a worthless albatross, a constant monument to his triumph. Doubtless, he envisioned her groveling, begging forgiveness, accepting any concession. She balled her hands into fists, her nails biting into her skin. No. She would not afford him that satisfaction. She refused to let him define her. "So," Flora stated, her tone surprisingly firm, "what options do I have?" Brenda glanced up, a hint of surprise flickering in her eyes. Perhaps she'd anticipated tears or a fiery outburst. Well, you could attempt to sell it as is, though I wouldn't harbor excessive hope. You might attract a developer interested in the plot, but their offers will likely be insultingly low. Or, she paused, tapping the folder once more, you could explore demolition and remediation independently, then seek to sell the vacant land. However, that's a hefty investment, with no guarantee of recouping your outlay. Flora gazed out the window, her vision fixed on the fractured asphalt and rampant weeds surrounding the garage. The mural, a faded relic of Rosie's angels, was barely discernible beneath the accumulated grime. A sudden image surged through her mind, women clad in work overalls, their faces resolved, their hands wielding wrenches, their laughter bouncing off the rafters. What about grants? Flora inquired, turning back to Brenda. For historical conservation. Or small enterprise development. Brenda pursed her lips. Possibilities might exist, but they're fiercely competitive, and the paperwork is extensive. And frankly, Flora, given the property's state, I doubt you'd qualify. It hardly meets the criteria of a historical landmark. Flora's shoulders drooped. It was futile. Absolutely, completely without hope. She was in over her head, a fish out of water, struggling against a tide of debt and decay. Her knowledge of garages was non-existent, her grasp of mechanics rudimentary, her familiarity with historical preservation nil, and her ability to navigate the bureaucratic maze of grant applications utterly lacking. "Thank you, Brenda," she mumbled, rising. "For your candor." Brenda mirrored her action, extending a flawlessly manicured hand. "I regret I didn't have better tidings, Flora. But sometimes, it's prudent to cut your losses." Flora clasped her hand, the cool, sleek skin a stark contrast to the rough hands she recalled from her grandmother. "Perhaps," she replied, forcing a smile. "But I'm not quite prepared to concede defeat yet." She exited the office, the weight of Brenda's assessment bearing down on her shoulders. The sun seemed to have retreated, enveloping the world in a lackluster, gray fog. She paused, studying the garage, its ramshackle exterior a testament to years of abandonment. "Worth less than scrap metal." The words reverberated in her thoughts. She ambled toward the garage, her shoes grinding on the loose gravel. She shoved open the groaning door, the familiar aroma of oil and dust engulfing her. The interior was even more bleak than she'd remembered. Tools littered the floor, encrusted in rust. Components were stacked haphazardly in corners, gathering dust bunnies. The atmosphere was thick with the burden of years gone by. She moved toward the mural, her fingers tracing the faded pigment. Rosie's angels. Who were these women? What was this place like in its prime? A surge of curiosity, a spark of defiance, kindled within her. She dedicated the next hour to simply exploring the garage, touching objects, scrutinizing details, striving to envision its vibrant past, when it pulsed with the energy and ardor of Rosie and her crew. She unearthed old photographs tucked away in drawers, faded and cracked, yet still revealing glimpses of smiling faces, of women in overalls, of a community flourishing in this neglected pocket of Harmony Creek. These images served as a lifeline, a connection to something tangible, something precious. They were evidence that this place had once held significance, something worth defending. As the afternoon waned, the initial flood of despair began to ebb, replaced by a reluctant sense of resolve. Perhaps Brenda was correct. Perhaps the garage was devoid of value in its current form. But perhaps, just perhaps, it possessed the potential for something more. Perhaps it could serve as a monument to the strength and perseverance of Rosie's angels, and homage to the women who had sustained the nation during wartime. Perhaps, just perhaps, it could represent Flora's opportunity to prove Hank wrong, to confound everyone's expectations, to demonstrate to herself that she was capable of surpassing her perceived limitations. She knew the undertaking would be daunting. It would be a protracted, demanding struggle, fraught with obstacles and disappointments. Yet, as she stood there, enveloped by the spirits of Rosie's angels, she felt a flicker of hope ignite within her, a small, tenacious flame that refused to be snuffed out. She would proceed incrementally. One step at a time. She would investigate grant possibilities, she would delve into the realm of historical preservation, she would master the intricacies of engine repair, even if it proved overwhelmingly challenging. She refused to allow Hank to emerge victorious. She refused to let this place crumble into oblivion. She would discover a means to resurrect Rosie's angels, to honor their legacy, and to construct something new, something meaningful, from the remnants of her former existence. She reached into her pocket, retrieved her phone, and entered Historical Preservation Societies near Harmony Creek into the search bar. The screen illuminated, a beacon in the dusty murk. The battle was underway. A spark of hope. Fluorescent tubes buzzed overhead, casting skeletal shadows across the grime-slicked floor. The sheer volume of cast-offs filling Rosie's garage felt like a physical weight, a testament to years of neglect. Hank's dismissive words echoed, each syllable a barb. Worthless, he'd sneered. Is it? Flora muttered to the dust devils waltzing in sunbeams. I'll redefine worthless. The historical preservation grants and Rosie's angels, lottery tickets, both. What she needed now was a tactical strike. If she couldn't conjure instant value, perhaps she could coax out latent potential, scrub away the biohazard and reveal a hidden gem. A whisper of doubt flickered, but she stamped it out. Losing to Hank was the true madness. A reconnaissance mission to the hardware store yielded her arsenal: industrial-strength solvent, contractor-grade trash bags, gauntlets that reeked faintly of petroleum, and a respirator that transformed her into an extra from a low-budget space flick. Returning, armed and ready, Flora scanned the disaster zone. The office, tucked into a far corner, seemed the least hostile terrain. Within, toppling stacks of files, a desk entombed in paper, and a swivel chair that shrieked at her very presence. She targeted the desk first. A crust of grime coated everything, broken only by the filigree of spider silk. Beneath the accumulated filth, a small cache of tools, a rusted wrench, pliers, a screwdriver with a fractured handle, nestled like forgotten treasures. They felt significant. The papers, a disordered symphony of invoices, receipts, and jottings, crumbled at her touch. Most were illegible, ghosts of transactions past. Yet, amidst the debris, fragments of Rosie's story began to emerge. A carbon copy invoice for a carburetor, dated 48. A note scribbled on a greasy napkin, spark plugs, champion number 7. Then, a snapshot, Rosie, a mischievous grin playing on her lips, grease smudged on her cheek, posing beside a gleaming Ford coupe. Flora froze. Rosie's eyes held a spark of brazen self-assurance that stung with its absence in her own life. She traced the image with a rubber-clad finger. "All right, Rosie," she murmured, "show me your secrets." Emboldened, she moved on to the filing cabinets. Most drawers were barren, their secrets long since plundered by time. But in the lowest drawer of the final cabinet, she discovered a stack of ledger books bound in cracked leather. Their pages, filled with meticulous records of income and outgoings, dated back to the 1940s. The handwriting, elegant and precise, stood in stark contrast to the surrounding chaos. Hours eroded. The sun arced higher, painting the grimy windows with streaks of light. Her back screamed, her hands throbbed despite the protection, and each breath tasted of dust. Yet, she pressed on, driven by a burgeoning sense of purpose. Small victories emerged from the grime. A patch of linoleum flooring, surprisingly vivid beneath layers of muck. A window, scrubbed clean, offering an unexpectedly clear vista of the street outside. A toolbox crammed with surprisingly well-preserved implements, discovered in a shadowy recess. One moment in particular resonated. While grappling with a jammed drawer, she dislodged something small and tarnished from beneath a mountain of invoices. A silver locket, intricately engraved with vines and blossoms. With hesitant fingers, Flora sprung it open. Inside, 2 miniature portraits. A younger Rosie, her hair arranged in victory rolls, and a man in uniform, his gaze full of quiet devotion. A wave of emotion crested within her. These weren't mere relics, they were echoes of lives lived, a love story captured in amber. This garage wasn't just bricks and mortar, it was a reliquary of memories, a tribute to the women who'd toiled within its walls. By late afternoon, Flora was spent, coated in layers of grit, her lungs protesting each breath. The office, while still a far cry from pristine, showed definite signs of resurrection. The desk was clear, the floor swept, the windows gleamed. The ledger book sat neatly stacked, awaiting her scrutiny. More profoundly, Flora felt different. The initial despair had ebbed, replaced by a fragile tendril of hope. She'd confronted the insurmountable and carved out a foothold. Small, but significant. And in that sliver of triumph, she rediscovered her resolve. As she gathered her belongings, anticipating a long, hot shower, she noticed something previously obscured. Scratched into the concrete floor near the office entrance were two sets of initials, R, B, and J, M, faint, almost invisible, but undeniably there. Rosie's, and those of the soldier in the locket. Flora smiled. She wasn't simply cleaning a garage. She was exhuming a legacy. And she was determined to give it voice. Before leaving, Flora tenderly placed the locket atop the ledger books, a silent offering to Rosie and her lost love. "I've got this," she whispered, before locking up and stepping back into the twilight, feeling lighter, stronger, and infinitely more focused than she had that morning. The immensity of the undertaking hadn't disappeared, but it now felt surmountable. Perhaps, just perhaps, she could actually pull this off. Rosie's journal. The air was a heavy blanket, saturated with the odor of spent fuel and unfulfilled ambitions. Flora choked, swatting at the stagnant atmosphere. Another day, another layer of industrial archaeology unearthed. Hank's scornful prediction haunted her, "That wreck will swallow you whole." Each push of the broom, each discarded bearing and slick patch, was a silent rebellion against his negativity. She would prevail. This place would be reborn. Working the back corner, a realm of perpetual twilight, she faced a chaotic testament to years of decay, a jumble of corroded tools and disintegrating cardboard. Wresting a particularly stubborn knot of oily cloths from under a listing shelf, a weighty object struck the concrete with a muffled thud. Flora startled, her pulse quickening. Warily, she knelt, clearing away the remaining debris. There, nestled in the gloom, was a book. Not just any book, a hefty, leather-bound volume. Time had etched its passage onto the cover, the once supple hide now cracked and faded. Its original color, a profound brown verging on burgundy, was only hinted at in the shadows. Scars marked its surface, tiny hieroglyphs of wear, and one corner was softened and turned down from countless readings. No title was visible, only the ghost of what might have been gold leaf lettering, smoothed by the relentless caress of time. Tentatively, Flora reached out, her fingers dancing across the aged leather. It felt cool yet strangely vital, a physical link to a bygone era. A wave of quiet awe resonated through her, she held something sacred, something resonant. Lifting the journal, mindful of the delicate binding, she was surprised by its heft, the pages were densely packed. A faint, evocative fragrance wafted upwards, old paper and leather mingling with a whisper of something floral, perhaps dried lavender. Her thumb grazed the cover's edge, and a nearly invisible flap yielded, revealing a tarnished brass clasp. With unsteady hands, she released it. The journal side open, the ancient pages murmuring secrets into the stillness. The initial page was filled with writing, an elegant, flowing script rendered in faded ink. It was a cursive almost foreign to her eye, looping and twirling with confident grace. At the top, in a slightly bolder hand, a single word, Rosie's. Rosie. The name reverberated within her, a tuning fork struck in the silence. Rosie Riveter. Could it be? The journal of the woman whose spirit lingered in this very garage, whose legacy she now felt compelled to revive. Gently, Flora turned the page. The handwriting continued, each line dense with stories, observations, and reflections. Her eyes darted across the script, seeking meaning within the fading words. Snippets jumped out: Victory Garden, Liberty Bonds, Our Boys Abroad, Welding Arc. She flipped through more pages, her anticipation mounting with each glimpse. Sketches of engines, diagrams of contraptions, meticulous repair notes, interwoven with personal musings, fragments of conversations, glimpses into wartime life. Rosie's voice seemed to leap off the page, strong, independent, fiercely resolute. One entry snagged her attention. Dated June 6, 1944, beneath it, in a firmer hand, D-Day. Today, we fight for freedom on every front, from the beaches of Normandy to the workshops of America. Flora's breath hitched. The weight of history settled upon her shoulders, the profound knowledge that she held a tangible piece of the past, an intimate account of a monumental moment. This was more than a journal, it was a time capsule, a portal into the world of an extraordinary woman who had shattered norms and contributed to the war effort in her own remarkable way. Closing the journal, her fingers lingered on the worn leather. A tidal wave of emotion surged through her, a blend of reverence, respect, and a profound sense of kinship. She felt an almost palpable connection to Rosie, as though their paths were now inextricably linked. Hank's voice, laced with its demeaning snide, faded into insignificance. This journal, this space, this inheritance. It dwarfed him, her divorce, her own self-doubt. Rising to her feet, clutching the journal close, the garage felt transformed, imbued with a newfound sense of purpose. No longer a dilapidated structure, but a sanctuary, a repository of history, a testament to the strength and ingenuity of women. Flora knew, with unwavering conviction, that she needed to read this journal, to immerse herself in Rosie's words and unravel the secrets held within its pages. She needed to understand Rosie's story, to learn from her struggles, and to honor her memory by breathing life back into Rosie's garage. She placed the journal carefully on a relatively clear workbench, her gaze fixed on its time-worn cover. Retrieving her broom, she returned to her work, her movements now imbued with a revitalizing energy. The grime seemed less oppressive, the task less monotonous. She was no longer just cleaning a garage, she was unearthing history, revealing a story that demanded to be told. As she swept, questions swirled within her mind. Who was Rosie Riveter? What were her hopes, her fears, her ambitions? What obstacles had she surmounted, and how? And what became of her after the war? She burned to discover the answers. The journal was the key, the roadmap, the guide to unlock the secrets of Rosie's garage and, perhaps, to unlock something within herself as well. Later, after a shower that failed to completely erase the mingled sense of oil and legacy, Flora sat at her kitchen table, the journal resting before her. The overhead light cast a warm illumination on the aged leather, accentuating the scratches and imperfections that spoke of a life intensely lived. She poured herself a cup of tea, her hands trembling slightly with the weight of anticipation. Taking a steadying breath, she opened the journal to the initial page. The faded ink seemed to shimmer in the light, the elegant script inviting her to step into Rosie's world. She began to read, her voice a hushed murmur in the silent room, and as she did, Rosie's story began to unfold, a narrative of courage, innovation, and unwavering spirit that would forever alter Flora's destiny. Secrets beneath the surface. The journal smelled of aged paper and stale grease as Flora gingerly unfurled its delicate leaves. Rosie's script, surprisingly refined for a woman of her trade, pirouetted across the aged parchment. Dates marking the war years punctuated each entry, a private history interwoven with global upheaval. Settling onto the upturned crate that served as her perch, the meager light filtering through grime-streaked panes painted elongated shadows. It felt like intrusion, yet Rosie's words resonated, whispering forgotten truths. July 14, 1943. Another shipment tonight. The same cloak and dagger routine. They called it machine parts for the front, but I glimpsed the crates. Radios. Enough to fill half the damned place. Max says if the Fed so much as sniffed what we're doing down there, we're all looking at hard time. Tunnel. Flora frowned, rereading the passage, a pulse quickening in her throat. What tunnel? The garage was built on bedrock, solid as a coffin, or so she thought. No cellar, no sign of anything subterranean. She leafed ahead, hunting for more clues. October 26, 1943. The heat's on. Max burning the candle at both ends trying to keep the plates spinning. We had a hair raiser today. A dodgy plank near the bench almost blew our cover. Had to hammer it down fast. I nearly jumped out of my skin. a dodgy plank near the bench. Flora's eyes shot to the battered workbench against the far wall, its surface a chaotic landscape of rusty implements and orphan bolts. She stood, a current of anticipation electrifying her. Could it be? Approaching the workbench, her fingertips traced the contours of its time-worn surface. Dust motes danced in the feeble light as she explored the floorboards at its base. Old, worn, seemingly immutable. Except there. Nearing the front left corner, one plank stood out. The grain ran against the others, and the nail heads gleamed newer, brighter. Tentatively, she pressed. It yielded slightly, emitting an ominous groan. Adrenaline flooded her system. This was it. Using a flathead screwdriver liberated from the workbench, she carefully leveraged the edges of the board. The nails protested with mournful squeals as they gradually relinquished their hold. With a final tug, the board surrendered, revealing a black void beneath. The air that poured out was frigid, humid, laced with the aroma of earth and a strange, metallic tang, faintly electric. Flora knelt, peering into the abyss. Utter blackness. Rummaging in her toolbox, she retrieved a small flashlight. Its beam lanced through the murk, unveiling a steep, earthen staircase descending into the unknown. The stairwell walls were crudely carved, reinforced by decaying timbers. A genuine tunnel, however rudimentary. Rosie hadn't been exaggerating. Her mind raced. What had this tunnel served? Contraband. Concealment. The journal spoke of radios, components, and a perpetual dread of discovery. It all hinted at something covert, something far grander than a simple auto shop. The subsequent entry confirmed her dawning awareness, June 6, 1944. D-Day. The news blared from the radio all day. Mac was a caged tiger, chain-smoking like a chimney. Kept repeating, "This is it, Rosie. This is what we've been busting our humps for." I didn't get it then, not really. But I do now. All those radios, all those parts, feeding the resistance, helping them sink their plays. We were part of something bigger, vital. Flora gasped. Rosie and her cohorts weren't just tinkering with engines. They were bolstering the war effort, risking their necks to aid the Allies. The garage wasn't just a repair shop, it was a clandestine hub, a crucial link in a chain of defiance. A wave of reverence washed over her. She had stumbled upon a fragment of suppressed history, a secret verse in the ballad of World War II. And she, Flora Lemon, was now its custodian. The thought prickled her skin, not with trepidation, but with exhilaration, a sense of purpose dormant for too long. She had felt so adrift, so useless since the divorce. But now, she had a quest. She had to unearth the complete chronicle of Rosie and her cohorts, to celebrate their bravery and their sacrifice. She directed the flashlight deeper into the tunnel, its glow catching on something metallic embedded in the dirt wall. Reaching out, she brushed away the clinging soil. It was a small metal plaque, discolored with age. She wrenched it free, exposing a string of numerals and letters etched into its surface. R42C, what did it signify? A cipher. A label. Another piece of the jigsaw. She continued to devour the journal, her fingers gliding over the words as if to absorb Rosie's essence. Later passages alluded to concealed recesses within the garage itself, camouflaged as mundane storage. One mentioned a false partition behind the parts cabinet, another a secret cavity beneath the oil drum platform. Her gaze flitted around the garage, assessing the possibilities. The parts cabinet, a colossal metal edifice crammed with dusty shelves and forgotten pieces, stood sentinel against the back wall. The oil drum platform, an elevated wood surface where the hefty oil drums once resided, commanded a corner near the entrance. More mysteries, begging to be exhumed. The sun was beginning to dip, flinging elongated, grotesque shadows across the garage floor. The air chilled, and the reek of damp earth from the tunnel intensified. Flora knew she couldn't delve further tonight. Too dark, too perilous. But she would return. She meticulously replaced the floorboard, concealing the tunnel's maw. She couldn't leave it exposed. Someone might glimpse it, uncover her secret. She had to safeguard Rosie's legacy, to keep her memory burning. As she turned toward the door, she paused, glancing back at the garage. It no longer appeared as a decrepit ruin, a symbol of her failings. It resembled a treasure trove, brimming with secrets and unwritten tales. She had arrived here broken, disoriented, uncertain of her trajectory. But now, she had discovered something. Something unexpected, something potent. She had forged a bond to the past, a sense of vocation, and a flicker of optimism. She smiled, a genuine smile that illuminated her eyes. Flora Lemon, the freshly divorced housewife with supposedly no skills, was on the cusp of becoming an archaeologist of the soul, a sleuth of buried histories. And she couldn't wait to see what she would expose. The rusty key. Rosie's last journal entry pulsed with secrets as Flora reread it, the words practically leaping from the aged paper. The tunnel. Hidden alcoves. A clandestine ring of women challenging norms, perhaps even undermining the enemy. Suddenly, the garage morphed in her perception, transforming from a monument to her stalled life into a trove awaiting discovery. A keen sense of purpose sparked within her. She wouldn't merely renovate the space, she would awaken its dormant history. Methodically, she began a tactile exploration, her fingertips dancing along the wall surfaces, alert for any anomaly. The heavy air, saturated with the ghost of old lubricants and grime, coated her skin and hair. Sunlight poured through the clouded windows, illuminating dust motes swirling like microscopic dervishes. Her hand slid along the furthest wall, where Rosie's hint of a hidden tunnel entrance lingered. The concrete felt impersonal and coarse, an unbroken plane save for the random brickwork. Hours dissolved. Aches blossomed in her knees, her back screamed in protest, and shimmering lights threatened to engulf her vision. Doubt, that unwelcome shadow, began to snake its way into her thoughts. Was this a fool's errand? Was she misinterpreting the scribblings of an elderly woman? Flora banished the creeping negativity. Rosie's voice, captured in ink, rang too true, too vibrant to dismiss. She persisted, resolve solidifying with each unsuccessful pass. Then came tapping. Brick by painstaking brick, she listened for deviations in sound. Most gave a flat, unwavering response, the solid echo of stone against stone. But then, close to the floor, obscured by a barricade of forgotten tires, a shift emerged. A subtle, almost imperceptible alteration. A hushed resonance. Adrenaline flooded her veins, washing away the exhaustion. She attacked the tires with newfound strength, dragging them aside until the wall section stood revealed. One brick wore a darker hue, as though inserted later. Circumscribing it, a hairline fracture traced a subtle outline, almost invisible. Flora's breath caught. This had to be it. She pressed, testing its stability. Firmly seated, yet with gentle, steady urging, she felt movement. A minuscule shift, enough to galvanize her instincts. Impatient now, she wedged her fingernails into the crevice and levered. Mortar crumbled, expelling a puff of fine dust that tickled her nose, triggering a sneeze. After a cough and a wave of her hand, she tried again. This time, the brick gave way, sliding inward with a soft rasping noise, revealing a small, rectangular hollow. Her heart hammered. She reached into the aperture, her fingers grazing cold metal. She withdrew it, a key. Tarnished and aged, it felt weighty in her palm. Its teeth, complex and worn, hinted at intricate mechanisms. A shiver vibrated through her. More than a simple key, this was a relic, a tactile link to Rosie's world, to secrets sealed behind garage walls. A wave of lightheadedness surprised her. She leaned back, legs suddenly unsteady. The magnitude of her find crashed down. Not just auto repair, but an unearthed legacy, celebrating the courage and ingenuity of the women who came before. Close examination showed a rose, almost erased by rust, etched into the handle. A Rosie's angel. Where did it lead? What lock would it release? Possibilities sparked in her mind, each more captivating than the last. To the tunnel itself? Or to one of the concealed compartments, revealing more threads in their story? She straightened, her purpose rekindled. The garage was no longer a burden but the promise of adventure. She had a key, a journal, and a driving need to know more. The sun dipped below the horizon, stretching long shadows across the floor. The air cooled, bringing the scent of damp earth and impending rain. Time to pause. But as she turned, her gaze snagged on a small, wooden workbench, tucked in a corner, half hidden by discarded rags. Unassuming, yet something drew her. An intuition, or a whisper from the past. She crossed to the workbench and began clearing the debris. Wrenches, screwdrivers, pliers, a grimy collection lay beneath. Brushing aside the last rag, a small, nearly invisible impression caught her eye. Circular, roughly the size of a keyhole. Flora's breath hitched. Could it be? She pulled out the key. With trembling hands, she inserted it. It slid effortlessly, clicking into place with a satisfying sound. A surge of anticipation. She inhaled deeply, then turned the key. Click. A small drawer, concealed beneath the workbench, sprung open with a gentle sigh. Nestled within, cushioned on faded velvet, lay another artifact, a pair of goggles. Classic aviator goggles, with leather straps and round lenses. Almost pristine, as if cherished. Flora picked them up, tracing the smooth curve of the lenses. Cool and substantial in her hand. As she held them, a sharp image burned in her mind. A woman, grease-streaked, wearing those goggles, her face set with a determined expression, bent over an engine. Rosie. The goggles seemed a portal, granting a glimpse into Rosie's life. A moment of passion, defiance, and purpose. Tears pricked Flora's eyes. This was more than restoration, it was connection. Honoring a woman who dared to challenge expectations, who turned her skills into a force for change. And Flora Lemon would do the same. Down the rabbit hole. The key, weighty and cool in her hand, felt like a solid piece of Rosie's resolve. It was an unusually long key, its intricate teeth suggesting a lock of considerable complexity. Breath held, Flora returned to the workbench, where the goggles had rested like a cherished memento. And there, almost hidden against the weathered wood, a subtle fissure marred the floorboards. Kneeling, she traced the line with her fingertips, searching for any sign of release. Nothing. A wave of impatience washed over her. Had she been mistaken? Another false lead in this repository of forgotten things. Then, almost by chance, her nail snagged on the barest indentation, no bigger than a pinprick. She pressed. A muted click echoed in the still garage, and a square section of flooring shifted upward. A jolt of anticipation surged through her. This had to be it. With fingers suddenly clumsy, Flora freed the panel. The 2-foot square lifted easily, surprisingly light. Dust motes danced in the lone sunbeam slicing through the gloom, revealing a void. An utter, lightless abyss, redolent with the aroma of damp soil and something indefinably ancient. It was a stale, almost metallic tang that made her nostrils twitch, conjuring images of long-lost secrets. Flora swallowed hard. This was more than just fixing up an old car or digging up family history. This was a plunge into the unknown. Snatching the powerful flashlight from her toolbox, she swept a beam into the darkness. A steep staircase descended into the earth, the steps roughly carved from stone and slick with moisture. The walls were identical, cold, clammy stone. Cobwebs, thick as spun sugar, draped everything, glimmering faintly in the flashlight's glare. Doubt tugged at her. What if the passage were unstable? What if it gave way? Or worse, rats. A shudder traced her spine. She was, after all, entirely alone. But Rosie's image flickered in her mind. Rosie, who had faced demons far greater than rodents and crumbling stone. Rosie, who had risked all for her convictions. Flora drew a long breath, hardening her resolve. This wasn't just about personal curiosity. This was for Rosie. For all the women who'd found haven here. She owed them the truth. "All right, Rosie," she murmured, the sound bouncing back to her. "Let's see where this goes." Holding the flashlight aloft, she stepped down. The stone felt frigid and slippery under her worn sneakers. The air turned noticeably chillier, the musty odor intensified. Each footfall echoed strangely, amplifying the silence. The staircase was steeper than anticipated, nearly a ladder. She gripped the wall for balance, her hand encountering the cold, damp rock. Cobwebs brushed her face, tickling her skin and eliciting a shiver. As she went deeper, the sunlight vanished, swallowed by the oppressive darkness. Only the flashlight cut through the Stygian gloom, its beam jittering across the rough-hewn surfaces. She began to count the steps, trying to gauge the depth. 10, 20, 30. The air grew heavy, thick, almost smothering. The scent of wet earth became overpowering, mingled with a faint, acrid note she couldn't quite identify. 50 steps. A pause to catch her breath. Her thighs ached, and anxiety clenched her gut. What lay below? And why conceal it so meticulously? She directed the flashlight downward, trying to penetrate the inky blackness. The staircase seemed endless, dissolving into obscurity. The thought of turning back crossed her mind. No one would fault her. It was imprudent, reckless even, to venture further alone. And then, she perceived something. A faint pinprick of light, far below. Tiny, almost imperceptible, but there. A glimmer of hope in the suffocating gloom. Hope. That was Rosie's legacy. A reason to press on, even when all seemed lost. Flora inhaled deeply and resumed her descent, her pace quickening. The light grew stronger with each step, an invitation in the dark. 70 steps. The air was thick and stifling, constricting her breath. Her lungs burned, and her legs trembled with exertion. She couldn't retreat now. 80 steps. The pinpoint was now a tangible glow, illuminating the nearby walls. She saw the tunnel widening, the roughly chiseled stone giving way to smoother, more crafted surfaces. 90 steps. She heard a faint resonance, a low hum vibrating through the stone beneath her feet. A mechanical drone, like a distant engine or the thrum of electricity. 100 steps. The staircase terminated abruptly, opening into a small, circular chamber. Brick walls, smooth and cool to the touch, enclosed the space. A lone bulb, shielded by wire mesh, hung from the ceiling, painting the scene in a weak, yellowish light. The chamber was barren, save for a solitary wooden door set into the far wall. Solid and imposing, it was reinforced with metal bands. A small, hand-lettered sign was affixed to the door. Flora entered the chamber, her heart hammering against her ribs. She shone the flashlight on the sign, her breath catching in her throat as she deciphered the words, faded but readable: Rosie's garage, authorized personnel only. Rosie's secret stash. The door possessed a deceptive heft, its aged timbers unyielding. Flora steeled herself, inhaled deeply, and shoved. A rusty shriek rent the stillness as it yielded, hinges lamenting decades of dormancy. A stagnant miasma assaulted her nostrils, damp earth mingled with a sharp tang reminiscent of corroded metal and long-forgotten implements. She thumbed her phone to life, casting a stark beam into the murk. Before her, a claustrophobic passage bored into the earth. The walls, raw stone, exuded a clammy chill. A subterranean thrum, barely audible, vibrated up through her boots. With a hesitant step, Flora entered. The temperature plunged, raising gooseflesh on her arms. Her light pirouetted across the rough-hewn surfaces, exposing alcoves hewn from the rock. Most stood empty, but some housed skeletal remains of crates, their contents vanished to time. Others were choked with what appeared to be the detritus of obsolete machinery, rusted cogs, shattered levers, and unrecognizable metallic fragments cloaked in grime. The hum intensified fractionally with each pace, drawing her onward. She trod carefully, wary of the uneven flagstones. Gnarled roots, like grasping claws, sprawled across her path. She pictured Rosie and her angels racing through these very arteries, faces illuminated by the meager glow of lantern light, their voices hushed by the weight of secrets, driven by purpose. What tasks had consumed them here? What lay concealed? Further along, the passage dilated into a broader chamber. The phone's meager light struggled to illuminate its entirety, but Flora discerned ranks of stacked crates, their wood aged and scarred. Faded stencils marked their surfaces, numerals, glyphs, symbols beyond her ken. The air hung thick with mildew and rot. The humming now seemed centered in this space, resonating within her very core. Circumspectly, Flora approached the barricade of crates, her palm brushing against their abrasive surfaces. They felt substantial, weighty. What secrets had they guarded for so long? Dust motes swirled in the narrow column of light as she swept it across the rows. She conjured the women who had packed these containers, their hands toughened by work, their faces fixed with resolve. Abruptly, the light snagged on one crate, set apart from its brethren. Smaller, meticulously crafted, it bore a painted inscription that, remarkably, had survived the years: Rosie's secret stash, unauthorized access prohibited. Flora's pulse quickened. This had to be it, the object of her quest, a direct link to Rosie's enigma. She paused, hand suspended above the lid, grappling with her conscience. Was she crossing a line? Was she entitled? The notion seemed preposterous. No one remained to object. Rosie was gone, the war a distant memory. The burden of truth now rested with Flora. Drawing a slow, steadying breath, she reached for the lid, secured by a corroded metal hasp. She fished in her pocket for the multi-tool, a habitual accessory since taking residence in the dilapidated garage. After a patient struggle, the clasp sprang free. The wood groaned as she lifted the cover. Inside, cushioned by decaying burlap, lay bundles of rolled documents, bound with twine. Gingerly, Flora extracted one. The paper, brittle and yellowed, bore intricate lines and notations. Unfurling it carefully, a complex mechanical blueprint materialized. Its purpose eluded her, but it was festooned with annotations in a flowing, elegant hand. Pressure regulator, modified, was scrawled in the upper corner. She chose another bundle, unrolling it to reveal a map, charting not the town above, but the subterranean labyrinth beneath. The cartography proved astonishingly detailed, delineating main arteries as well as narrower offshoots and concealed recesses. Certain areas bore markings she couldn't decipher. One region, circled in scarlet ink, was labeled Strategic Depot, High Priority. A jolt of adrenaline surged through Flora's veins. This was far more than idle tinkering. Rosie and her angels were embroiled in something grander, some clandestine undertaking. She scrutinized the blueprint, tracing the lines with a fingertip. The device looked elaborate, intricate. What function did it serve? And what lay at the strategic depot? Could it still exist, hidden deep beneath the town? Reaching for yet another bundle, her fingers trembled with anticipation. This one held additional maps, each depicting a separate section of the tunnel system. Some detailed ventilation shafts, others, electrical conduits. One even appeared to indicate subterranean water sources. As she sifted through the cache, the sheer scope of Rosie's enterprise became terrifyingly clear. This wasn't just a clandestine garage, it was an advanced underground facility, meticulously conceived and expertly maintained, with Rosie at its very heart. A sudden scrape shattered the silence. A sound from the tunnel entrance. She froze, her heart hammering against her ribs. Had she been followed? Was she no longer alone? Snapping off the light, she plunged the chamber into impenetrable blackness. The humming swelled, seeming to vibrate within her bones. She held her breath, straining to listen. The noise recurred, closer now. Someone was definitely down here. Her grip tightened on the crate's edge, knuckles bone white. She needed to vanish, but where? The chamber stood open, exposed. There was no refuge. Then, the map resurfaced in her memory, the one depicting hidden passageways. A small, unmarked niche lay concealed behind the crates, masked by a false panel. A desperate gamble, yet her only option. Silently, swiftly, she felt her way along the crates in the blackness. Reaching the designated spot, she ran her hands along the chilled stone, seeking the activation point. She found it, a barely perceptible depression. Pressing it, a section of the wall swung inward with a faint click, revealing a tight opening. Without hesitation, she slipped inside, sealing the panel shut behind her. The darkness was absolute, stifling. She could hear the frantic rhythm of her own heart. The scraping intensified, drawing nearer. Now, she could detect footsteps, echoing through the tunnel. Someone was entering the chamber. Pressing herself against the cold stone, she prayed to remain undetected. The footfalls halted just outside the crates. A lance of light pierced the gloom, bathing the chamber in a stark glow. She glimpsed the silhouette of a figure positioned near the entrance, their features swallowed by the shadows. They were searching for something or someone. Flora held her breath, her body locked with terror. Trapped, concealed in the dark, she was a silent witness to a mystery rapidly unfolding. And she understood, with a bone-deep certainty, that her existence had just entered a dangerous new realm. Rosie's secrets were more weighty, more fraught with peril, than she had ever dared imagine. The X marks the spot. Flora's flashlight jittered, the beam mimicking her heart's frantic rhythm. Above, the intruder's footfalls landed with jarring force, each impact a fresh assault on her courage. She inhaled deeply, centering herself on the spread of blueprints atop the grimy workbench. Exhalations ghosted across the delicate paper, obscuring the fine lines. She buffed the condensation away with her sleeve, fingers tracing the web of pathways that fanned from the garage like arterial routes. A map, undoubtedly. But not of Oakhaven's familiar streets. This depicted subterranean corridors, a hidden maze that wormed beneath the town. Several were tagged with known landmarks, the church steeple, the weathered mill, the depot. Others were marked with enigmatic symbols, a wrench askew, a stylized pinion, a closed hasp. The draftsmanship was remarkable, each passage designated by number and depth. Flora peered closer, struggling to decipher the antiquated script. Some notations were in English, others in an unfamiliar tongue, perhaps German, possibly French. Rosie, it seemed, had been deeply involved. She spotted the garage, pinned with a small but telling R.A., Rosie's Angels, she surmised. From that point, the tunnel split, some leading to what appeared to be ventilation systems, others towards clandestine access points within existing structures. The sheer scale of the enterprise was breathtaking. This wasn't merely a safe haven, it was an entire subterranean web. Flora's finger followed a particularly prominent route. It plunged directly beneath Main Street, skirting several buildings before ending at a massive structure identified by a single word, bank. A stark X was emblazoned across the designation. X marks the spot, the old saying echoed in her mind, but the dawning realization felt anything but trivial. What resided at the bank? What drew Rosie's interest? The sounds above shifted, drawing nearer. The intruder was circling, like a predator on the hunt. Flora's thoughts catapulted. She couldn't linger. She needed to escape, to decode the truth she'd stumbled upon. Gently, she folded the plans, tucking them into an inner pocket of her coveralls, snug against the journal. The journal. It might contain the answers she craved. Moving with practiced quiet, she hugged the wall, inching toward the concealed portal she had used to enter. The chill of the concrete pressed against her, a constant reminder of her vulnerability. Her fingers groped for the release. Abruptly, light assaulted the underground space. The intruder had located the master switch. Flora was pinned, frozen in the stark illumination. "Hello," a voice projected, muffled yet clear. "Anyone down there?" The timbre was male, and vaguely recognizable. Yet she couldn't place the speaker. Her pulse spiked. She had to improvise. If she was discovered, what alibi could she possibly spin for being in a clandestine facility teeming with World War II-era espionage material? Play dumb. It was her only recourse. Drawing a steadying breath, she moved into the light, hands raised in supplication. "Hello," she said, her voice catching slightly. I'm lost." A figure peered down, struggling to discern her in the dimness. A man, tall and powerfully built, with a shock of silver hair. As he descended, Flora placed him. Mr. Abernathy, the town's historian. Flora, he registered, his tone steeped in disbelief. Flora Lemon. What in creation are you doing down here? Flora mustered a weak smile. Mr. Abernathy. What a surprise. I was just exploring. He arched a skeptical brow. Exploring? In a condemned garage? At this hour? Well, Flora stammered, I'm trying to fix up the place, right? And I found this opening. And I was curious. Abernathy reached the bottom, his gaze taking in the space. His expression tightened as he observed the paraphernalia, the charts, the workbench. Curious enough to unearth all of this, he questioned, his voice losing its warmth. Flora swallowed hard. She was in a quagmire. I don't understand, she lied, feigning innocence. What is any of this? Abernathy sighed, raking a hand through his hair. This, Flora, is history. A history that some people would prefer stayed forgotten. He paused, scrutinizing her. Tell me, Flora, what precisely did you uncover down here? Flora hesitated. Could she trust him? He was the local historian, after all. But something in his bearing set her on edge. He seemed guarded. Just some old maps, she offered tentatively. And some tools. Nothing much. Abernathy's eyes narrowed. Maps, you say? Charts of what? Flora knew she couldn't fabricate a complete lie. He wouldn't buy it. She gave him a nibble of the truth, hoping it would satiate his curiosity. Maps of the town, she answered. But they're ancient. And they suggest some underground passages. Abernathy's complexion faded slightly. Passages, he echoed, his voice barely audible. What sort of passages? I don't know, Flora said, shrugging. I didn't really get a close look. They seemed to connect to different buildings. She watched for his reaction. He seemed agitated, almost fearful. Did you notice anything specific? He pressed, his voice laced with unease. Anything out of the ordinary? Flora considered the X marked on the bank. She knew she should keep it to herself. Not yet. No, she said, shaking her head. Just the passages. That's all. Abernathy stared, his gaze boring into her. Flora met his stare, trying to project guilelessness. At last, he sighed. Flora, he spoke, his tone softening a fraction. This is a dangerous place. You shouldn't be here. Promise me you won't return. Flora nodded sharply. I promise, she swore. She'd promise anything to extract herself. Good, Abernathy said. Now, let's leave this place. And please, Flora, forget all of this. As they ascended the stairs, Flora felt a strong sense of manipulation. Abernathy knew more than he was disclosing. And the X on the bank, it was far more than merely a map marker. It was the key to a secret, one that someone desperately intended to guard. And now, she was embroiled in the heart of it. The night air was a bomb as they stepped away from the garage. Abernathy secured the door, his movements brisk. Thank you, Mr. Abernathy, Flora managed. For helping me. He nodded curtly. Just stay away from this place, Flora. For your own safety. With that, he turned and receded into the shadows. Flora tracked his departure, her mind turbulent. She had pledged her word, but she knew she couldn't keep it. She needed to uncover what hid below Oakhaven, what Rosie had labored to shield, and the true meaning of the X scrawled upon the bank. Her curiosity, which had started as a minor intrigue, had morphed into an insatiable drive. She needed answers, and she would unearth them, regardless of the danger. Intruders in the tunnel. The blueprint blurred, its implications hitting Flora with the force of a tsunami. Rosie's angels were tangled in something far-reaching, the subterranean passages, the enigmatic symbols, the sheer scope whispered of a covert mission exceeding simple automotive maintenance. These tunnels were a clandestine vein, throbbing beneath Oakhaven, conveying secrets and, what else? Intelligence. Contraband. Fugitives. A shiver, a blend of trepidation and intoxicating curiosity, danced down Flora's back. Mr. Abernathy's caution resonated, adding a somber note to the musty air. The bank, what linked it to all this? The X emblazoned on the schematic signified importance, a crucial nexus in the angel's endeavors. Flora trailed a gloved hand along the clammy brick, seeking to absorb the echoes of the past. She pictured Rosie, young and resolute, navigating these corridors, her overalls stained with grease, driven by an inner fire. What cause fueled her? What truths did she guard? A subtle rasp shattered Flora's thoughts. She stilled, every sense heightened. It recurred, a distinct scuffing, coupled with the dull thud of a weighty object being shifted. Not rodents. This was something else entirely, something bipedal. Snapping off her flashlight, she plunged the passage into impenetrable blackness. Her pulse hammered against her sternum, a frantic tattoo in the suffocating quiet. Adrenaline surged, honing her perceptions. She flattened herself against the wall, dissolving into the gloom, listening intently. The sounds intensified, drawing closer. Two distinct voices, rough and hushed, penetrated the tunnel's silence. Told you this was a fool's errand, Vinny. Nobody set foot down here in ages. Button it, Sal. Frankie's positive it's here. Claims the old broad hid it well. Frankie. The old broad. Rosie. Flora tightened her grip on a discarded wrench. It felt pitifully inadequate. The voices were almost upon her, the jittery dance of a flashlight beam flickered on the stone. Think, Flora urged herself. A direct confrontation was out of the question. Not against two. Not in this claustrophobic space. Inhaling deeply, she edged further along the tunnel, seeking to outflank them. The coarse brick abraded her jacket, but she dared not betray her position. Rounding a bend, she discovered a small recess, barely sufficient for a single person. Ideal. She could lie in wait, allow them to pass, and then what? She was operating on instinct, hoping somehow to ascertain their identities and objectives. The voices were just beyond the alcove. Frankie said it's near the nexus. Vinny's voice, raspy and low, reverberated in the passage. Yeah, the nexus. Think I'm illiterate, Vinny. Just keep the light steady. Gotta tread lightly, Frankie mentioned, safeguards. Sal's voice possessed a smoother, more calculating timbre. Safeguards. Had Rosie booby-trapped the tunnels? This wasn't simply about concealment, it was about active protection. Flora held her breath as the flashlight's beam swept past the alcove's entrance. She discerned their silhouettes, two bulky figures dominating the tunnel. The flashlight bearer, presumably Sal, was noticeably taller, more broad-shouldered. The other, Vinny, was shorter, thick-set, his movements lumbering. They continued their trek, their voices receding slightly. Reckon this nexus connects to the bank? Vinny questioned. Sal emitted a low chuckle. Frankie holds his cards close to the vest, doesn't he? Just said there's something buried down here that's worth a king's ransom. Something the old broad didn't want found. The bank again. Everything led back to it. And Frankie. Who was he? Flora waited until their voices were barely audible before emerging from her hiding place. She shadowed them silently, adhering to the shadows, her pulse a frantic metronome against her ribs. She had to decipher their quarry. The tunnel widened into a larger chamber, the nexus, perhaps. Multiple tunnels radiated outwards, swallowed by the gloom. Sal and Vinny occupied the chamber's center, their flashlight beams crisscrossing the walls. Which way, Einstein? Vinny grumbled. Sal consulted a crumpled scrap of paper. Says, follow the northern passage. Look for the serpent emblem. Flora's breath hitched. The serpent emblem. She recalled it on the blueprint, near the entryway of the bank tunnel. They proceeded towards the north passage, their flashlight beams piercing the darkness. Flora remained concealed, her mind racing. She couldn't permit them to unearth Rosie's secret. But how could she possibly intervene? She was alone, armed with a rusty wrench, confronting two menacing thugs who seemed to know precisely what they were after. Just as she weighed her options, Vinny halted abruptly. "Hey, Sal," he said, his tone cautious. "Did you catch that?" Sal paused, his flashlight beam swiveling. "Just vermin, Vinny. Relax." "Nah, this was different. Like someone breathing down my neck." Flora froze, suppressing her breath, praying they would not detect her. Vinny recoiled, his gaze darting nervously around the chamber. "I don't like this one bit, Sal. Let's snag what Frankie wants and bolt." Sal scoffed. "Don't be such a scaredy cat, Vinny. We're nearly there. Just stay alert." He pivoted back towards the north passage, but Vinny remained planted, his eyes fixated on the shadows near the chamber's entrance. Suddenly, he lunged, his arm extended. "There," he bellowed. "I saw something move." Flora had no time to react. He was upon her in an instant, his calloused fingers clamping around her upper arm. "Gotcha," he roared, wrenching her into the light. Flora gasped, the wrench slipping from her grasp. Sal whirled around, his eyes widening. "What the hell?" Vinny dragged Flora to the chamber's center, his grip tightening. "Look what I reeled in, Sal." "A little trespasser." Flora locked eyes with them, her heart pounding. Vinny was even more intimidating up close, his face a landscape of scars and broken capillaries. Sal, regaining his composure, responded with a cruel smile. Well, he said, circling Flora slowly. "Seems we have a snoop on our hands. What brings you down here, sweetheart? Playing hide and seek?" Flora swallowed, attempting to project an assurance she didn't possess. I'm lost." Sal chuckled mirthlessly. "Lost? In a clandestine tunnel network? Highly unlikely. You know something, don't you? Something about what we're after." He advanced, his eyes gleaming malevolently in the flashlight's beam. "Tell me what you know, and perhaps, just perhaps, we'll let you walk out of here." Flora understood the gravity of her predicament. She had stumbled into a situation far exceeding her comprehension. And now, she was cornered, alone, with two men clearly prepared to resort to any measure to achieve their objective. Her only recourse was to stall, to somehow outwit them, and safeguard the secrets enshrined within these tunnels. The secrets Rosie had fought so valiantly to protect. But how? A chase in the dark. "What did you see?" The menace in Vinny's gravelly voice vibrated through the cramped space. He advanced, the flashlight's harsh glare momentarily blinding Flora. Sal, always calculating, raised a restraining hand. "Easy, Vinny. Let's not frighten her excessively. Lady, we know you've been poking around. Just tell us what you've unearthed. Anything about a package." Flora's thoughts churned. A package? Was that the prize? Some relic stashed away by Rosie's angels? She swallowed, striving for composure. I haven't a clue what you're talking about. I'm simply exploring. This is my property." Vinny scoffed. "Exploring? At this hour? Spare us the theatrics. We saw you with the journal." Rosie's chicken scratch. "What secrets did you unlock?" Rosie's journal. They were onto her. Flora inwardly reeled at her carelessness. A passage flashed in her mind, a hidden recess near the antiquated air ducts, a cryptic reference to a package destined for the nightingale. The nightingale. A person. A locale. "I deciphered nothing," Flora parried, her voice betraying her unease. She knew they wouldn't be fooled, but stalling was paramount. Sal's features tightened, the pleasant facade vanishing. "All right, sweetheart, we can pursue this gently, or with considerable force." He cracked his knuckles, the sound echoing like gunshots in the tunnel. This was the crucible. Submit or flee. And Flora Lemon, divorcee and unwitting inheritor of a clandestine history, opted for escape. Rosie's meticulously rendered map surfaced in her memory, pinpointing a concealed passage leading to a forgotten ventilation shaft just past the storage alcove. Drawing a fortifying breath, she faked a trip, sending a pile of discarded tools crashing to the floor. "Oops. My apologies," she chirped, the saccharine sweetness barely masking her panic. As Vinny and Sal recoiled, startled by the din, Flora shot off like a sprinter from the blocks. She lunged towards the storage alcove, her pulse hammering against her ribs. "Grab her!" Sal bellowed. She squeezed through the narrow conduit, the abrasive concrete tearing at her skin. It was a tight fit, clearly designed for a smaller frame, Rosie's, perhaps. She could hear Vinny's elephantine strides pounding after her, shadowed by Sal's more deliberate pursuit. She erupted into the ventilation shaft chamber. Dust motes pirouette in the flashlight's beam, revealing a labyrinth of corroded pipes. The journal had detailed how the shaft connected to a series of interconnected tunnels, a subterranean realm lost beneath Oak Haven. "She's headed for the old tunnels." Sal's voice boomed through the shaft. "Cut her off at the pass." Without pause, Flora plunged into the oppressive blackness of the tunnels, her flashlight carving a path through the gloom. The air hung heavy, thick with the musty scent of earth and decay. She navigated the serpentine passages, trusting her memory of Rosie's map and the sporadic, faded chalk markings on the walls. Behind her, she heard the cacophony of Vinny and Sal's clumsy pursuit, their curses reverberating through the confined spaces. Vinny was a battering ram, bulldozing through the passages. Sal was the hunter, calculating her trajectory. She veered into a claustrophobic side tunnel, the walls pressing in on her. The temperature plummeted, and a faint draft kissed her cheek. Rosie had mentioned this tunnel, noting a hidden air vent that opened into a disused coal cellar beneath the bakery on Main Street. The tunnel widened into a small chamber, revealing a crumbling brick wall. She located the air vent, a small aperture masked by a rusted grate. Too small to crawl through directly, but perhaps. She fumbled in her pocket for her multi-tool, her ex-husband's one genuinely practical gift. Unsheathing the screwdriver attachment, she attacked the corroded screws securing the grate. Behind her, the sounds of Vinny and Sal's advance crescendoed. "She's cornered!" Vinny roared triumphantly. Ignoring them, Flora worked with feverish intensity. The screws were fused with rust, but she managed to coax one loose, then another. The grate finally surrendered with a protesting groan, revealing a dark, constricted opening. She wriggled through the gap, dropping into the inky abyss below. She landed with a soft thud on a bed of coal dust, the air saturated with the acrid tang of soot. Gaining her footing, her flashlight illuminated a small, neglected cellar. Above, she could hear Vinny and Sal's frustrated bellows as they grappled with the air vent. It was impassable to their bulk. "She's in the cellar!" Sal yelled, his voice laced with fury. "Go around. The entrance is on Main Street." Flora wasted no time. She knew they would be upon her within moments. She discovered a rickety wooden staircase leading to a trapdoor in the ceiling. She shoved it open and scrambled out, finding herself in the abandoned bakery storage area. The bakery was a mausoleum of forgotten pastries. Cobwebs draped from the ceiling, and the air reeked of stale flour and decomposition. She could discern the muted hum of traffic on Main Street. She crept through the bakery, her footfalls echoing in the tomb-like silence. Reaching a back door, she slipped out into a narrow alleyway. Pausing to catch her breath, she could hear Vinny and Sal's distant shouts, their voices fading as they systematically searched the bakery. She had evaded them, for now. But she understood they would be relentless. They craved something that Rosie's angels had concealed, and they were prepared to cross any line to obtain it. Flora was acutely aware that she needed to be sharper, more vigilant. She needed to decipher their objective and their motive. And she was resolved to safeguard Rosie's secrets, whatever the personal cost. The pulse-quickening thrill of the chase, the surge of adrenaline, stood in stark contrast to the humdrum existence she had previously known. With a start, she recognized that despite the imminent danger, she felt invigorated. Merging with the shadows of the alleyway, she vanished into the urban night. The game was truly afoot. Trapped. The air inside the bakery was a sugary sweet trap, at odds with the frantic pulse hammering in Flora's ears. She needed a strategy, and quickly. Vinny and Sal were nothing if not persistent, of that, she was certain. Rosie's journal, gripped tightly, was her only hope. Its fragile pages fluttered as she sought anything useful, a shortcut, a trick, any advantage to stall her pursuers. There, nestled within a section detailing the subterranean maze, a rudimentary sketch labeled, "Ventilated Blind." Beneath, in Rosie's looping script, "For unwelcome guests. Down is always faster." A risky, exhilarating scheme bloomed in Flora's mind, banking on Vinny and Sal's penchant for muscle over intellect. She edged back toward the entrance, every nerve ending alert. The reek of damp earth and stale bread stung her nostrils. Vinny's voice, a muffled roar, echoed from the tunnel's maw. She couldn't have vanished. "Get every corner, Sal. That ledger is everything." Flora inhaled deeply, setting her plan in motion. According to Rosie's diagram, the ventilated blind was a brief deviation from the main passage, crafted to appear like a continuation. The ventilation chute, however, connected to a narrow conduit filled with discarded flour sacks from the ovens above. Ideal. She clawed at the ventilation shaft opening within the blind, wrestling with the rusted grate. It shrieked in resistance before finally yielding with a metallic groan that made her cringe. Praying they hadn't heard, she peered inside. Just as Rosie had described, a precipitous, flour-coated slide terminating in a mountain of empty sacks. Working with feverish speed, Flora dislodged several of the bulkiest sacks, sending them plunging down the shaft. A plume of flour erupted, momentarily blinding her. She coughed, swiping at the gritty cloud. Now, for the finishing touch. Using a shard of metal scavenged from the floor, Flora wedged the grate back into place, securing it precariously with a few carefully placed stones. It would appear secure, but wouldn't bear much weight. "All right, let's go." Vinny's voice was closing in. Flora plastered herself against the clammy tunnel wall, holding her breath as Vinny and Sal stormed around the bend. Vinny, predictably, led the charge, his face a mask of fury. Sal trailed close behind, his gaze predatory as he scanned the passage. "Dead end," Sal observed, his voice thick with disappointment as they reached the blind. She must have doubled back. "No chance," Vinny spat, shoving past Sal. "She's gotta be here." His eyes snagged on the ventilation shaft. "What's this?" He gripped the grate, giving it a perfunctory yank. It held momentarily. "See. Bugger all. Let's bounce." Sal started to turn, but Vinny remained fixed. "Hold up." He slammed his shoulder against the grate. The rock scattered instantly, and the grate burst open, unleashing a rain of rust and debris onto the tunnel floor. Vinny grinned, feral. Bingo. Without a second thought, he dove headfirst into the floury abyss. Sal hesitated, a flicker of doubt clouding his features, but Vinny's triumphant bellow from below propelled him forward. "Get a move on, slowcoach. She's gonna be at the bottom." Sal squeezed through the opening and vanished into the cloud. Flora waited, her heart a frantic drum, until a chorus of muffled curses and the satisfying thud of bodies hitting something soft confirmed her success. Time to move. She bolted back to the bakery, navigating the maze of toppled crates and abandoned equipment. Reaching the front, she fumbled desperately for her phone. Her hands trembled so violently she nearly dropped it. Finally, she managed to dial 911. 911, what's your emergency? The dispatcher's voice was a calm island in her storm. I need police assistance, Flora stammered, her voice wavering. I'm at O'Malley's Bakery on Elm Street. 2 men, they're trapped in the basement tunnels. They were trying to harm me. She gave her name and a concise description of Vinny and Sal, struggling to maintain composure. They're a danger to others, she added, and they were searching for something stashed away in the tunnels. The dispatcher reassured her that officers were en route. Flora disconnected and sagged against the wall, her limbs heavy with relief and bone-deep weariness. She had managed it. She had tricked them. Yet, the elation was quickly eclipsed by a daunting realization: it was far from finished. She had notified the authorities, but she remained ignorant of what Vinny and Sal sought, or why it held such significance. And she had a sinking feeling that their employer wouldn't be pleased about the botched operation. Moments later, the distant shriek of sirens sliced through the air. A wave of relief washed over her as 2 cruisers screeched to a halt outside the bakery. A tall officer, radiating authority and possessing kind eyes, approached. "Miss Lemon," he inquired, his tone gentle. "I'm Detective Miller. Can you recount what transpired here?" Flora escorted Detective Miller and another officer inside, narrating the events as evenly as possible. She gestured towards the concealed tunnel entrance and detailed the ventilated blind, emphasizing the flower chute. Detective Miller listened with unwavering focus, his face betraying nothing. He absorbed every nuance, his gaze darting around the space. "And these men, you say they were armed?" he probed. "I didn't see any weapons," Flora countered, "but their intentions were definitely hostile. And they alluded to a package concealed by some ladies who worked here decades ago, during the war effort." Detective Miller's eyebrows lifted imperceptibly. "During the war? This is taking an interesting turn." He instructed the other officer to summon backup before turning back to Flora. "All right, Miss Lemon. I'm going to need you to remain here while we investigate. Could you direct us to the location where these men are trapped?" Flora nodded, a jolt of nervous energy coursing through her. As she guided the detectives toward the tunnel entrance, she couldn't dispel the feeling that she had unearthed a Pandora's box. The secrets of Rosie's angels were far more perilous than she could have ever conceived, and she was now embroiled in a battle she barely grasped. But one thing solidified in her mind: she wouldn't yield. She owed it to Rosie and the other women who had risked everything in those tunnels to expose the truth, whatever the price. Rosie's legacy. The distant wail of sirens grew louder, morphing into a piercing shriek as police cars screeched to a halt outside the bakery. Detective Miller, a woman with a perpetually tired but sharp gaze, ducked under the yellow tape Flora had hastily erected and descended into the flour-dusted chaos of the basement. "Miss Lemon." Miller's voice cut through the lingering scent of yeast and panic. Flora, still trembling slightly, pointed towards the ventilation shaft. "There, in there." I jammed the door shut. They were trying to get into the tunnel. 2 officers, their faces grim, wrestled with the makeshift barricade. Grunts and curses echoed as they finally pried the door open, revealing Vinny and Sal, coated head to toe in a thick layer of white flour, resembling 2 disgruntled snowmen. They were hauled out, sputtering and coughing, their bravado completely evaporated. Miller surveyed the scene, her expression unreadable. "All right, let's get these 2 cleaned up and booked. Miss Lemon, I'm going to need a statement." The interrogation room was stark and sterile, a sharp contrast to the chaotic, flour-bombed bakery basement. Flora recounted her ordeal, her voice gaining strength as she described Rosie's journal, the hidden tunnels, and the men's aggressive pursuit. Miller listened intently, occasionally scribbling notes on a yellow legal pad. "And they mentioned a package?" Miller asked, her gaze unwavering. "Yes," Flora confirmed. "They kept saying they needed to find it. Something hidden here, under the town. Something important." The detective leaned back in her chair, her brow furrowed. "All right, Miss Lemon. We'll look into it." The police investigation that followed was swift and thorough. The tunnels, once a hidden network of wartime secrets, were now crawling with officers, their flashlights illuminating long-forgotten corners. It didn't take long for them to discover the men's true intentions. A detailed plan, meticulously sketched on a crumpled napkin, revealed Vinny and Sal's plot to rob the First National Bank. The tunnels, it turned out, ran directly beneath the bank's vault. News of the foiled robbery and the discovery of the hidden tunnel spread through the town like wildfire. The Willow Creek Gazette ran a front-page story with the headline, "Local Woman Uncovers World War II Secret, Foils Bank Robbery." Flora Lemon, the quiet divorcee who had inherited a dilapidated garage, was suddenly a local hero. The story reached Mayor Mildred McMillan's ears early the next morning. Mildred, a woman known for her efficiency and perfectly coiffed hair, initially feared the negative publicity surrounding the near robbery. But as she read the article and learned about Rosie's angels, her perspective shifted. Mildred arrived at the garage mid-morning, her tailored suit a stark contrast to the grease-stained floors and rusty tools. Flora, still reeling from the events of the past few days, greeted her with a hesitant smile. "Miss Lemon," Mildred said, extending a hand. "I'm Mildred McMillan, the mayor. I wanted to thank you, personally, for your bravery and for uncovering this remarkable piece of our town's history." Flora blinked, surprised. It was nothing, really. Nothing. Mildred raised an eyebrow. "You foiled a bank robbery and unearthed a piece of our past that we had completely forgotten." "That's hardly nothing, Miss Lemon. In fact, I believe Rosie's garage deserves recognition." Over the next few weeks, Rosie's garage underwent a transformation. The police investigation concluded, the tunnels were secured, and the garage was officially declared a historical landmark. Mildred spearheaded the effort, organizing fundraising events and securing grants for its restoration. Flora found herself at the center of it all, giving interviews to local reporters, sharing stories about Rosie and her angels, and overseeing the restoration work. The garage, once a symbol of her despair, was now a beacon of hope, a testament to the strength and resilience of women who had dared to defy expectations. As the dust settled, Flora realized that she had changed too. The timid, uncertain woman who had arrived in Willow Creek was gone, replaced by someone stronger, more confident, and more determined. She had faced danger, uncovered secrets, and found a purpose she never knew she was searching for. But the mystery of the package still lingered, a nagging question mark in the back of her mind. What was it? And why were those men so desperate to find it? One evening, after a long day of restoration work, Flora sat alone in the garage, surrounded by the ghosts of Rosie's angels. The air was thick with the scent of oil and metal, a comforting aroma that had become familiar. She picked up Rosie's journal, its pages worn and brittle, and began to read. She lingered on a specific entry. It was dated June 6, 1944, D-Day. Rosie's handwriting was frantic, almost illegible. She wrote of a secret mission, a crucial delivery, and the importance of protecting the package at all costs. The entry ended with a cryptic message, "Beneath the willow, where the river bends, lies the key to what transcends." Flora frowned. The willow, the river. It had to be the old willow tree that stood on the banks of the Willow Creek, just a short distance from the garage. The tree was ancient, its gnarled branches reaching towards the sky like skeletal fingers. A sudden chill ran down her spine. Could the package still be there, hidden beneath the roots of the old willow tree? The next morning, before the restoration crew arrived, Flora walked down to the riverbank. The willow tree stood majestically, its branches swaying gently in the breeze. She knelt down at its base, her fingers tracing the intricate patterns of the exposed roots. As she dug, her fingers brushed against something hard and metallic. Her heart pounding, she pulled it free. It was a small, tarnished silver locket. With trembling hands, Flora opened the locket. Inside, nestled against a faded velvet lining, was a tiny, folded piece of paper. She carefully unfolded it, her eyes scanning the faded ink. The message was simple, yet profound: hope is the thing with feathers. It was a line from an Emily Dickinson poem. But what did it mean? And how did it relate to the package? As Flora pondered the message, she noticed something else. On the back of the locket, etched in delicate script, were two initials, E.B. E.B. Who was E.B.? And what role did they play in Rosie's story? The mystery of the package had just deepened, leading Flora down a new and unexpected path. A path that would take her deeper into the secrets of Willow Creek's past, and closer to uncovering the truth about Rosie's legacy. And, perhaps, closer to finding her own treasures beneath the rust. The news trucks were long gone, their departure etched in the tire ruts marring the weedy patch Flora now grimly acknowledged as her front yard. The stark yellow police barrier had yielded to a homespun sign, Rosie's Garage, future home of history. Inside, the vast space still hummed with the ghosts of oil and metal, a scent that clung to her like a second skin. Journalists had pressed her relentlessly about her plans. Liquidate. Rezone. Each time, she'd offered the same unshakable declaration, I'm keeping it. Hank, predictably, considered her daft. Flora, darling, he'd purred, his tone a slick coating of condescension she'd come to loathe, be reasonable. It's a derelict. Imagine the profit. Profit she had imagined, a life untethered by worry, where every whim could be indulged. Yet, the image of Rosie, of the women who had poured their courage into this very structure, rendered such calculations hollow. No, Hank, she'd stated, her voice a steel rod. I won't sell. It will become a museum. The hollow echo of his laughter filled the shop. A museum? For what? Dirty tools and jalopies. Who on earth would visit? Her only answer was a secret smile. The initial task was a thorough cleansing. Flora threw herself into the work with renewed vigor. She attacked the grime-coated floors, banished cobwebs from the high rafters, and carefully catalogued the jumbled inventory. Each object seemed to murmur a forgotten tale, a whisper from the past. Initially, the town watched with cautious skepticism, but then they started to gather around her. Volunteers materialized, armed with sponges, brushes, and a shared desire to help. Elderly women, their eyes alight with recollection, offered anecdotes of wartime scarcity, sacrifice, and the indomitable spirit of Rosie the Riveter. Even Mayor Macmillan, initially concerned about the disruption from the robbery, transformed into an ally. She smoothed the path through bureaucratic thickets to secure historical landmark status and even wrangled a small grant for renovations. Transforming Rosie's Garage was more than just a job, it became a personal quest. Flora immersed herself in the garage's history, painstakingly reconstructing the stories of Rosie and her angels. She unearthed faded photos, poignant letters, and detailed schematics tucked away in the building's forgotten corners, each illuminating a new facet of the narrative. She discovered that Rosie, formerly Rose Briarwood, was far more than a mechanic. She possessed a brilliant engineering mind, a knack for strategy, and an unyielding sense of purpose. The garage had functioned not just as a repair shop, but as a covert nerve center for the resistance, where daring women defied the odds in pursuit of freedom. With the museum's development, Flora felt a purpose she hadn't realized she craved. No longer simply Flora Lemon, the woman defined by her divorce, she was Flora Lemon, guardian of Rosie's legacy. Then Hank reappeared, piloting his ostentatious new sports car, likely purchased with the phantom riches he'd envisioned from the sale. He loomed in the doorway, his face carefully arranged into an expression of remorse. Flora, he began, his voice honeyed and meek. I've been thinking. I was mistaken. About the garage, about everything. Flora arched a brow. Oh, really? Yes, he pressed, stepping inside. I now recognize it's not just a dilapidated building. It's history. And you, Flora, you're achieving something remarkable. He paused, taking her hand. His touch felt alien, unwelcome. I want to be involved, he declared. I want to assist you. Anne. I want us to reconcile. Flora stared, a cocktail of amusement and disbelief churning within her. Did he genuinely believe she would welcome him back after his persistent disparagement, his grasping materialism, his utter lack of comprehension? Hank, she responded, gently but definitively extracting her hand, I appreciate the sentiment, but, no. I don't need your involvement. And a reconciliation is out of the question. His carefully constructed facade crumbled, replaced by a familiar mask of fury and frustration. "You're making a mistake, Flora," he hissed. "You'll never find contentment alone, presiding over this glorified scrap heap." Flora smiled, a genuine, warm smile that reached her eyes. "On the contrary, Hank," she countered. "I've never been more content." She watched him retreat, his sports car spitting gravel as it sped away. She felt not a shred of regret, not even a tremor of sadness. She felt unfettered. The museum's grand opening coincided with the anniversary of D-Day. The town arrived en masse, eager to honor Rosie's legacy and Flora's vision. Elderly veterans, their chests glinting with medals, recounted their wartime experiences. Children, their eyes wide with fascination, explored the displays, marveling at the ingenuity and bravery of the women who had paved the way. A corner of the museum housed Flora's bakery. She christened it Rosie's Sweet Surrender, a tribute to the sacrifices and the sweet taste of liberty that Rosie and her angels had championed. The fragrance of freshly baked goods mingled with the lingering scent of oil and metal, creating a comforting and unique ambience. Flora resurrected her grandmother's recipes, crafting pastries that evoked nostalgia and warmth. The bakery was an instant sensation. People journeyed from far and wide to savor Flora's creations, bask in the museum's atmosphere, and hear the tales of Rosie's angels. Flora found herself embraced by a community of supportive friends and colleagues. She employed a vibrant young baker named Lily, who shared her love for baking and history. She collaborated closely with the local historical society, organizing events and educational programs that breathed life into Rosie's narrative. She even initiated guided tours of the hidden tunnels beneath the garage, revealing the secrets she had uncovered and enthralling visitors with stories of daring espionage and covert operations. The package sought by the bank robbers remained elusive. Flora had not found it, despite her meticulous searches of the tunnels and the garage. But she refused to relinquish hope. She knew the truth would surface, and when it did, she would share it with everyone. Standing behind the counter of Rosie's Sweet Surrender, handing a warm apple pie to a delighted customer, Flora recognized her true calling. She was no longer a divorcee defined by her past, but a guardian of history, a champion of women, and a purveyor of delectable treats. She had transformed a dilapidated garage, a symbol of past disappointments, into a beacon of hope and inspiration. She had drawn strength from the stories of Rosie's angels, and she had unlocked her own hidden potential. The divorce had given her a rusty repair shop, but it had also given her something far more valuable, a blank canvas to start a new life and carry the torch for the women who came before her. She had been given a rusty repair shop in the divorce, and beneath the rust, she had uncovered treasures.